Hello, and welcome to the Euclid Studio version 5 introduction. I'm Kevin Frame, the Euclid Studio product manager, and today I will be taking you through the highlights of this release. We will start with a brief tour of the new user interface. Then we will build out a simple flow to show you what some of the basic data management functionality looks like. And lastly, we will end with a review of one of our predictive flows. Let's get started with a tour of the new UI. Front and center, you will notice the canvas. Euclid Studio is a very visually driven application, and the canvas is where we will be designing our flows. The first step in designing your flow is adding nodes to the canvas. We can add nodes to the canvas in a couple different ways. The first way is through the nodes toolbar on the left. This is very similar to what you had seen in the previous version of the application. We have a couple different menu modes. We have the list mode here, which gives you some more information about each of these nodes, in addition to supplying a help section, which I'll show you in a moment. And then we have the grid view, which just shows you more nodes, less information. We're going to go back to the list view here. So if I want to add this flat file node to the canvas, I simply grab it and drop it. We've shifted to a drag and drop interface for this section. If I want to find information about a node before I add it to the canvas, for example, database, I can go ahead and just click on that question mark, and it expands out our help section. We've added a help section to the application now, which will show you relevant help based on where you're navigated. In this example, we're looking at the reference documentation for database. This same information lives on our wiki, and you can navigate there from the link here below, but this is a way to embed it in your application so you're not jumping around between tabs. Go ahead and click Help. We can close that section. There's another way that we can add nodes to the canvas, and that's through the Add to Canvas functionality in the bottom right. Go ahead and click that. Now, unlike the toolbar menu where you're adding one node at a time, this allows you to add a branch. A branch is what we are calling multiple nodes together in a series. So let's say we wanted to start off with a flat file node, and then we wanted to add a filter node, filter some of the columns, and then ultimately export that to a flat file. We've now designed out our branch here in this Add to Canvas menu. If we want to remove one of them, we can drag, drop to delete, we can drag to reorder, to really get this representing what we're looking for here. These links are to show that we want a connection between these nodes. If I toggle that link, it'll give me these three nodes, but the last two will not be connected. And again, we have two different menu modes for adding these nodes to this section up top, the list view and the grid view. So now I have the nodes that I want in my branch, and I want to be able to add all three of these to the canvas at the same time. I can do that simply by clicking Add at the bottom, and you'll see under my cursor, I now have all of those nodes, and wherever I place them, when I click, they get added to the canvas in that order. You can also notice that there's a little indicator here, and these nodes past the flat file that are upstream are gray. The indicator is saying that we have a new node that we've added to the canvas that we haven't yet configured. It's just a way for us to make it a little more discoverable that you have some configuration left to do before you run anything. The gray sections indicate that an upstream node needs to be configured. Okay, so now that we've kind of wrapped up some of the canvas basics, we're going to be moving on to some of the other sections. Next up, we have the Flow toolbar. That's this section up here at the top. We can see we have Flow 1 opened, and it's actually in a dirty state, which means it's not yet saved, and that's indicated by the asterisk here. We have a menu on the left where we can create a new flow, open an existing flow, or save this flow under a different name. We have a quick save option. You'll notice that the hotkey Control+S is indicated in our tooltip below. We have flow options, where we can set connections that are used within this flow. And again, those connections are for relational data sources such as SQL Server. We have flow details. This provides information about the flow ID and provides some links for quick access to this specific flow. And lastly, we have email alerting. This allows you to set up alerting for this particular flow so that you get an email when it completes, fails, or gets canceled. In the middle section here, we've moved recent flows to a drop-down where you can see I have a bunch of recent flows. I can click on any of those flows and it will automatically be navigated to them. On the right, this is where we've moved our Run Profiles section. You can click on this Edit button, which will open up our Run Profiles menu, which we'll go to in just a moment. And then we can see our active run profile. We only have one selected here. It is selected here rather than the Run Profiles menu. And on the end, lastly, we have the ability to run this flow and a detailed option to run and notify, which again will just run that pre-configured email alerting step in your flow once complete. Now that we've talked through the flow bar, let's take a quick look at the Run Profiles menu. Here we are in the orchestration section, which is our first tab in the Run Profiles section. We hadn't Run Profiles orchestration section in the prior version, but now it's on its own tab. This is where you can change the run order of the various steps and choose to include or exclude steps for execution. We have a new area for parameters. Here we can define those default parameters. And then we have a section that will show you your parameters by node. Again, these are all just broken out into their own tabs, and it's all the same content from before, just reorganized for Run Profiles. At the top right of the application, we have some nice status information. The first menu shows us active flows. Right now you can see a 1 is indicated there in the badge, which shows that me, as the single user, is active in the system. I can go ahead and navigate there. You can see what my session ID is, my tab ID, and then we can just see what active sessions are there, what flows we might have open, and then there's a flow conflict section to indicate if there is any flow conflicts at the moment. I'm the only user, so there won't be any. We also have a section for running jobs. There's no jobs currently running, so that's why the badge is showing 0, but I can click here to quickly navigate to this section. On the active jobs page, we can see any currently running jobs, and then inactive jobs will show jobs that have completed. So we can see I ran a job here, it did complete, and if I wanted to, I could go take a look at logs. We'll come back here a bit later. At the bottom, we can see some information about our valid subscription, when that's going to expire, and what the subscription includes. In this example, our data management ETL nodes are part of our license, as well as the modeling predictive functionality. And in the far right, we can see how much RAM utilization we have. This is something that's really useful just to see, keep an eye on to see how much RAM you're using and if you might need more if you're processing a lot of data. Lastly, we have the application menu on the left. We've already seen the nodes menu, but above that we have home. This just gives us access to create new flows, open existing flows, or close our current flow. We have the jobs section. Again, this is just a different way to get to jobs. You notice we had a quick access in the top right, but we also have it in the menu. We can see activity that takes us to that same menu. We have a job scheduling section where you can go in to actually schedule jobs to run at a particular time and date. We have file watcher functionality, which is just a different way to trigger the execution of a job when you place a file in a directory to be processed. We have a connections section. This is where you go in to actually define your data connections to a relational source such as SQL Server. We have cloud connector settings. This exposes Euclid Studio to the cloud in a very secure manner. So you can have Euclid Studio installed on premise, let's say, but still communicate, orchestrate, and integrate with cloud solutions very easily. This is our user section. Again, this is just a different way to get to the same user menu from the top right. We have an exercise section, which we're really excited about. This is a brand new concept for Euclid Studio. We have two types of exercises. We have node examples, which gets you familiar with examples surrounding the usage of particular nodes. So if you want to get a better idea for how to use the cluster node, let's say, you can jump right into examples that are integrated to Euclid Studio. Those upgrade packages are evolving over time, and you can simply pull them down from any version of Euclid Studio to get those updates and work through those examples. We have detailed steps on how to work through those examples, but the actual files and content are all shipped through and served in Euclid Studio for ease of use. The second set of exercises are how-to exercises. These might involve a couple different nodes, and you might be solving a small portion of a business problem. It gives you a little bit more meat of an example to actually work through problems that resemble more of the day-to-day challenges as opposed to just one-off node examples. Really excited about exercises and can't wait to hear all the feedback on those. We have a settings section where you can set preferences. We have a licensing section where you go in to set up your license for the first time and update any licensing options if you start off with the ETL package, let's say, but then you want to upgrade to our predictive suite. And lastly, we have our About section. This includes links to our wiki, reference documentation, an About section with more details about version numbers for the application, and then some system information, which just kind of shows you the specs for your current system you have Euclid Studio installed under. That's our basic tour, taking you around the application and its various parts. We will get into some more of the specifics through our two examples. For our first example, we'll be jumping into some flat file management. The backstory is we have two files from two different stores representing some demand data. We're going to perform some cleanup in one of the files so that it fits the same shape as the other, and then we're going to combine both of those files and output them to the same file. So let's get started. We're going to go ahead and create a new flow. We're going to add our first flat file node. So again, just going to grab that node, add it to the canvas. I'm going to right click on the node. So one of the areas we didn't get into was the new context menu and the operations available. We won't go through all the options, but just on the surface, reviewing what we have here. We can open from this menu. Alternatively, you can double click on the node to open it. We can directly preview from this menu when preview is available for a configured node. We can click add, which will bring up our add to canvas functionality so that we can add a node to this node, and you will see this node show up as the first one in the branch. We can connect. This is just a different way to drag the line between this node and another. And then we have various options like copy, paste, duplicate, delete through edit, some disconnect options, and then some very similar edit options, but to manage the entire branch, our favorite being the addition of auto align, which you will see in a moment. So we're going to go ahead and open this node. When you open a node, you get your pane sliding out from the right, and you can see that we are now in node edit mode. We can't work with the canvas at all, but we can see what's there. We're going to go ahead and browse for our file. So in source files, we're going to load our first file here. So we have two stores. So we're going to load store 1993. And now that we've selected the file, well, we know it's a comma separated file, so we're good here. We're all set with our quote character. The first row in this file does contain header records, which you'll see in our preview in a moment. We're going to let Euclid Studio guess on the data types for this file. So we're going to click on Infer Data Types. Notice that preview is not available because we have to guess the types first before we can see the data. So we're going to go ahead and click Infer Data Types. Preview becomes available. We can see the data types have been inferred. And now we can preview to see what we ended up with. So it looks pretty good. What do we have here? Well, we have a SKU column. Looks like there's a dot in there. This looks like one of those files that we probably need to clean up. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove that dot. Really, the SKU should just be this 4-digit number. It's also a double data type, and really we want the SKU to be a string. So we'll go ahead and make that change. To make that change, we're going to go to our advanced section here, data type assignments. This became available when we told Euclid Studio to guess the data types. When we navigate to this section, we can see each of the columns and their data types, and we can remap them. So we're going to quickly change the SKU data type to a string. This is something you can also do in the filter node if you prefer to do this step in a separate process. So we're going to go ahead and go back. We'll re-preview just to make sure it gets changed, and we can see it's changed to a string. So this includes our SKUs, store IDs, we have some unit demand data, and then some additional data on some of our predictors like digital ad spend, print ad spend, average selling price, and lastly our period. So we have our year in the first 4 digits, our month in the second 2, and then our week in the last. We have a section up here on previews where we can actually go in and exclude or include any of these columns just to reduce this down for what we're looking for. This doesn't actually remove the columns from the data set, but rather it is a way for you to be able to limit the data you're looking at for ease of previewing. Now that we've made these changes, we're going to click Save. It's going to take us out of node edit mode. Our warnings have been removed from this flat file node, and we're ready to move forward and actually make our change. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to add the cleanse node. Now I could just grab the cleanse node and drop it here and then manually connect it. But one of the new features that we're excited about is the ability to drag this node over the flat file node. You can see when I do that, the color changes to indicate that we are now dropping on top of flat file. When I let go, we automatically connect those two nodes. So now we have the cleanse node. This is where we're going to actually go in and make the change to remove that period from the skew field. So I'm going to open. We're going to make a change to the skew field, so I'm going to select that as the text column to cleanse. We have some options here that we could do, like convert the entire field to an uppercase version of itself, a lowercase version to itself, or do nothing. Right now it's numbers, so we're fine. We're going to trim any leading or trailing spaces. Those were difficult to see in the preview, but we can go ahead and do this. Select this option so that they get removed. And we're going to go ahead and add a regular expression, which is just a simple way to perform some text logic. We see we have an example here that essentially replaces all of the non-alphanumeric numbers with blanks. We're going to change this and we're just going to say remove period from skew. You may not be familiar with regular expressions. We can go into that in a later session. But right now, all we need to do is just put in a period in between these two brackets, which indicates that we want to replace the period character with nothing. Essentially, remove it. Now that we've added our expression, gave it a nice little description so that if anybody comes in here, they know what this is actually representing, we can preview this step, which shows us what the output will look like coming out of the cleanse node once we save. Now that we preview, we see that the skew field as a string is now correctly 4 digits without that period. We're going to save this. Great. So now we are at the point where we can merge this flat file store data with the next flat file store data. So let's go ahead and add that other flat file. Going to move a little quicker here now that we know what we're doing. 1150 is the other store file. Going to infer and preview. Okay, now same columns in this file, but a different order. That's fine. Reordering isn't a big deal when we go to combine. What is important though is that our skew field is 4 digits and doesn't include that period, which is nice. In a real world, we're going to also change the data type here to string. In a real world example, you might actually have store data coming in that comes in different shapes depending on how they're reported from the store. So a step like this, being able to clean each of these all in the same process is super, super useful. So now we're going to combine both of these using our union node. So I'm going to select from the cleanse node, connect it to the union node, and the same from flat file. Now we mentioned auto arrange before. We're going to show you how that functionality works to align all of this content. So we're going to go to branch, align branch to node, and you'll see it auto formats the connections to space them out nice and evenly. You can also use a hotkey to do that. So now we're going to click on the union node, and we're going to select both of these nodes to merge. This is going to combine the data from each of these files into one big file. Let's preview. Great. So we can see the skew, store number. Again, remember store 1993. And then we have store 1150. So it merged both these data, both of these sets of data on top of each other. And again, even though they were in different order, Euclid Studio went in and figured out which columns matched up, made sure they were the same data types, and combined them all in a single file. We're going to go ahead and save. Move down to flat file here as our export. We're going to drag that right on top of our union node. And we're going to go ahead and output. So there's no preview here. We would preview the union node if we wanted to see what the output looked like, and we just did that. So in order to write this file, we choose our location, which we can browse to. So in this case, I'm just going to output to demo. In output, we can actually change the delimiter here from comma to pipe or tab, change the quote character, the quote strings, and choose to include or exclude the header, as well as how many decimal places we want for our numeric fields. We're going to go ahead and run this. Great. All right. So what happens is now we have an output file. We're going to go ahead and save. And just to confirm that this worked, we're actually going to go take a look. Let's browse, and here's the output. Guess and check. And now we can see we have our completed file that is combined from both stores. We have our records for 1150 and 1993. Wonderful. In our next example, we'll be walking you through a predictive flow. Here we are in our next example. We're going to be walking through the workflow flow. This is going to demonstrate some predictive functionality along with an introduction to some of these other nodes, and ultimately reviewing a smaller business process. Oftentimes in your business process, you break it out into different steps. We like to think of this as a relay race of sorts. In this example, the first leg of the race is gathering data from the organization, organizing it, and writing it to a database in our data hub. The second group is going to pick up that baton, pull in the information, perform a time series forecast using our forecast node in Euclid Studio, and then write those results in a raw format for the last team. The anchor group's going to pick up the baton from that table, transform those results into a consumable format, and produce charts out of them so the rest of the organization can consume in a much more easier way. It's important that each of these steps is consistent and that each team agrees on what the shape of the data is when they hand over that baton. So in a normal business process, this branch would be in its own flow, as would this branch and the last branch. But for simplicity of presenting in this example for the demo, we kept it all in a single flow so we can walk through it. We can see here in the first step that we're pulling data from a database. If we pop in, we can see we have a connection defined and a simple query written. We can go ahead and preview that data. We can see the shape of the data is very similar to data from our last example. One of the things of note here is that there are leading zeros in the skew that we don't want. We're pulling data in from a file. So again, two completely different technologies, one pulling from a source database and another just simply from a flat file. This skew not having any leading zero. And we're going to go ahead and combine those two sets of data that are close enough in shape. We're going to go ahead and filter them. So this filter node allows you to go in and supply remappings for data types, names. You can exclude columns here as well. And you can see we have the skew column, for example, being changed from an integer to a string. This becomes relevant in the cleansing node step. Here, what we're going to do is get rid of those pesky leading zeros. So we go ahead and choose the skew column. And we've written a regular expression here to replace those leading zeros. Again, if you don't know what regular expressions are, there's plenty of content out there. We have some documentation on our wiki that goes into some detail around what they are. Really, it's just an elegant way to perform some text manipulation. What we tried to do is include a description field here so that when you come into the node, once somebody has crafted their regular expression, you can explain what it does without having to get into the weeds or the details of the actual logic in the expression. But again, this just says replace all the leading zeros. And you can always come back to this for reference and use in other areas of your application. So when I go ahead and preview from this cleansed text node, we can see the skew field now has those leading zeros removed, which is perfect. After this step, we write the data to a database using our database export node. So the baton is now handed over for the second team to pick up when they are ready. So the second team is just going to go ahead and query that table. So you can see we just have a query here, and they're pulling from that same database, pulling in the information where team 1 left off. Next, we move into the forecast node. We won't go into super detailed explanation of the forecast node, as we will leave that for a separate video, but we will briefly skim over the options. Everything here is set to default for the most part, but the selections that we do have to make, we will go over. So split columns here really is just referring to how many different forecasting models are we going to create, and how are we going to create them. So what we're saying here is for every SKU, every item that we are selling in every store, we want a different model. This allows us to apply our strategy to the time series forecast a single time, one configuration, but have it take into account all of the variability across items at different stores. Really powerful. Our target column here, in other words, the thing that we are trying to predict, is unit demand. We then have sort by columns, which is a way to provide the order in which you want the columns to be sorted before they are forecasted. We do not have an outlier column defined. We have some predictors that help us arrive at an answer informed by digital ad spend, print ad spend, and average selling price. We're going to go ahead and perform an auto model and define our periodicity as 52. This is a weekly forecast, so the periodicity here is 52 weeks in the year. The rest of the settings here we will be going over in a separate video. When I preview at the end of this node, we get a whole bunch of data, so much that it barely fits on the screen. This is a great time to use our column dropdown. We're going to go ahead and choose the SKU and the store number. Again, this is what we've broken out as our combo split here, called split columns. Same thing, different words, the way that we've broken out the different models that will be produced. We're going to choose our year, period, and week to see here. Our unit demand again, which is the actual value. We have a whole bunch of output here from the model, which can be used to evaluate the effectiveness of the prediction. We're going to choose the forecast field, which is actually the forecasted value. So you might say to yourself right away, you already have an actual value here for unit demand. Why would you have a forecast as well? This is actually going to score or forecast all of your periods, as if it were a back test, let's say, for all of these fields. But you wouldn't use this forecast, obviously. It's just to get an indication as to how it's performing against actual values for those time periods. So we go all the way down unit demand through all the time periods up until there's no more actuals. Those will be the periods that we're actually predicting. And we actually have to sort this first. So let me pop into the sort node. Apologies. Let's go ahead and choose those columns again. And forecast. Perfect. Scroll down. Here we go. All right. Took us a bit, but we've arrived. All right. So unit demand. These are the actual forecasted values for this unknown time period. And this was for 2017 when we did not have those actuals. Great. So zooming back out, team 2 is done. The forecast is produced. All those columns that you saw before are getting written to our output database in our data hub. Team 3 is ready to come in, take that information, and make it consumable. So they've come in, they've pulled in the fields. We're using this filter node here to make sure that we have the right columns that are named correctly and they have the proper data types. We have a script node. This is an opportunity for us to show off our scripting capabilities. We have Python chosen as our script type, and this is a Python script that's actually going to create a new field for us. In this particular example, We are grabbing the year, the month, and the week and combining them all together in a year, month, week string that ends up as the last column in our data set. We can go ahead and preview this. It's going to take a minute. We have a lot of data coming in. And we're going to go ahead and exclude all the columns and just include the new column that we have added. Let's see if we can determine where it was added. There it is at the top. There it is. So it combined, and just for reference, let's include the year, the period, and the week. So we have 2013. We've padded it with the 0, so rather than just 9, it's 0, 9, and the same with the week. This way we end up with a consistently sized string. Actually, we're treating this as an integer here, but we could easily remap it. And we're going to be using that field in a chart. So we have two different charting strategies here. The first is using our Euclid Studio charting node. We won't be going into a detailed version of setting up the charting node, but we will be going over the basics. So we have on our y-axis the demand, and we have time along our x-axis. Again, see we have our unit demand, which is in red here, and then we have our forecast in blue. So everything from 2017 here, 09 first week forward, that's just blue, is actually what we predicted. Everything else is historicals and how the prediction performed across all of these values. You can see it's a pretty good fit across history. So that gives us good confidence in our prediction. Up top for the title here, this is the combo split, the split column setting that we set in the forecast node. And notice that we have a unique prediction for the particular SKU store combo. You will also notice we have a previous and next button here. We're able to actually toggle through the different combinations of forecasts that were produced for each of those values. Here we have another prediction for a different combo, and we can iterate through all of them right here in a single node. We also have the option to export the chart. When I click on this button, it goes ahead and downloads the image to my computer for ease of consumption on the fly. Again, this charting node is really here to be interactive. Quickly grab that image. If you want to take this chart and actually export it in a more dynamic or automated way, you can use a Python library to do that. So here's an example where we're actually going through building out a Python example. Perhaps you already have the Python code in your organization. Euclid Studio can make use of existing Python code, even targeted to your particular version, so you get reuse, and now you're able to operationalize what you already have in your organization, and now it's just part of a more seamlessly integrated solution. And this last function here is actually just going to perform the export of that charting file to the directory of your choosing for folks to consume. That concludes our walkthrough of the updates of Euclid Studio version 5. Really excited to see everybody upgrading and getting feedback over the next coming months. Please don't hesitate to reach out, support@QueBIT.com. If you need help upgrading, if you need help putting a plan together, QueBIT's here to help you out. Happy coding.